Montana Territory, 1880. The wind howled over the scorched ridges of the Judith Basin as the stagecoach wheel buckled and pitched their world sideways. Marigold Greene hit the earth hard, her shoulder taking most of it. Dust clung to her dress, the hem already torn from weeks of travel. Her arms flew out instinctively, shielding the two small bodies tucked below the overturned coach. "Stay down," she whispered to the children. Virginia, 10, clung to her little brother, 5-year-old Vernon, both wide-eyed and silent. They did not cry. They never did anymore. Not since their father dropped them into Marigold's arms outside a saloon in North Platte, mumbled something about not cut out for family life, and vanished down the street. Now, 5 weeks later, they were alone again. The driver was dead. The other passenger, a banker from Minneapolis, had run when the wheel gave, and they had not seen him since. Marigold pushed herself up from the dirt, ignoring the sting in her shoulder. "We have to move." The kids nodded. They always nodded. She led them away from the broken coach, across the wide emptiness of the plains. Her boots were falling apart. Her last coin had gone to feed the children in Fort Benton. She had not eaten since. She did not know where they were, not exactly. Just that east meant more of what she was running from, and west might mean work, or worse. By nightfall, she was carrying Vernon on her hip and Virginia was limping. Her throat burned. The sky turned blood orange and then faded into black. She dropped to her knees beside a dry creek bed and pulled the children close. "I am sorry," she said, voice hoarse. "I should have done better." Virginia clutched her hand tightly. "You are doing better." But Marigold did not believe that. Not really. She had tried to be a mother to them. She had tried to matter. But all she had done was lose weight, lose hope, and now lose a stagecoach in the middle of nowhere. When she heard the horse, she thought it was in her head. Then hoofbeats pounded closer, steady and fast. A single rider. She stood, shielding the children again, heart hammering in her ears. The man pulled up hard, dust spraying around his dapple gray gelding. He swung down before the horse had stopped moving, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low over deep-set eyes. "You all right?" he asked, voice low and rough-edged. She stared at him, too tired to lie. "No." He looked past her toward the children, then back again. "Anyone else with you?" Marigold shook her head. "Just us." He nodded once. "Come on. We cannot pay you," she said sharply. He unhooked a canteen from his saddle and handed it to her. "I did not ask you to." She hesitated, then unscrewed the cap and passed it to Virginia. The girl sipped and handed it to Vernon. Only after both had drank did she allow herself a taste. The man waited, quiet, still. Marigold looked up at him again. "Why are you helping us?" He met her eyes. "Because you look like you need it." He helped them onto his horse, Vernon in front of him, Virginia behind, then reached for Marigold. She froze. "I can walk." "It's 10 miles back to my place," he said plainly. "And you ain't making it on your feet." She gritted her jaw, then let him lift her onto the horse behind Virginia. His hands were strong but gentle, the kind that had hauled fence posts and broken colts for years. She held tight to her little girl and said nothing. They rode under the moonlight in silence. His ranch sat in a shallow valley, a modest house next to a barn and some fencing that needed mending. He helped them down and opened the door. "Name's Silas Jensen," he said. "You can sleep here. I will take the barn." Marigold stepped inside, wary. The house was plain but clean. One bed, one table, a rocking chair by the hearth. He handed her a blanket from a chest and nodded toward the bed. "Let them sleep. You can have the chair." She wanted to argue, but the children were already curling up together and her legs were shaking. She lowered herself into the rocker, watching him light the stove. He poured hot water into a chipped cup and passed it to her. She drank slowly, eyes never leaving him. "You live alone?" she asked. He nodded. "I did." She caught the past tense but said nothing. "Who are they?" he asked. "They are not mine, not by blood. Their father left them with me. I could not leave them." He looked at her, quiet and steady. "You did right." She stared down into the cup. "I am not worth helping." He crouched in front of her then, hands resting on his knees. "You are worth every mile I rode to find you," he said, her breath caught. She looked away. Silas stood and walked to the door. "Get some sleep." That night, Marigold sat awake in the rocker, watching the children breathe. She had not felt safe in so long, she almost did not recognize the feeling. When the sun rose, Virginia stirred first. Where are we? Somewhere better, Marigold whispered. She stepped outside just as Silas finished splitting a pile of logs. He looked up at her, sweat on his brow, shirt sleeves pushed up strong arms. I can work, she said. You do not have to feed us for nothing, he nodded. All right then. That day, she helped clean the barn, mended tack, and even managed to get Vernon to smile when he fed a chicken that pecked too fast. Virginia brushed the old mule and asked 100 questions about ranch life. Silas watched from a distance, quiet as always. That night, he brought her a plate with beans, bread, and a slice of dried apple. You are good with them, he said. I try, he stepped closer. You do more than try, Marigold's hand stilled. I do not know how to be enough. For she stopped, throat tight. Silas did not finish her sentence for her. He just sat beside her and said, You do not have to be perfect to be loved. She looked at him, eyes stinging. I am not worth loving. He shook his head slowly. You are worth every mile I rode. She blinked fast, a tear slipping down her cheek. He reached out and brushed it away with his thumb. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Vernon's sleepy voice called from the bed. Mare, she stood quickly. Coming? But as she walked away, she glanced over her shoulder. Silas was still watching her. Not like a man who pitied her, like a man who saw her, and maybe, just maybe, wanted her to stay. The third morning on Silas Jensen's land dawned cold and silver, the kind of Montana chill that sank into bone before the sun could burn it off. Marigold pulled Vernon's coat tighter around him as they stepped out onto the porch. Virginia followed, eyes fixed on the frost-veiled grass. Silas was already hitching the team to a wagon near the barn, his breath rising in steady clouds. He didn't look up until the creak of the porch boards gave them away. You up for a ride? He asked. Marigold hesitated. She didn't ask where, he didn't offer. She nodded, and within the hour, the wagon rolled west along a narrow track that rose and fell with the hills. Vernon sat between her and Silas, hands tucked into his coat sleeves. Virginia took the back, her eyes roving the landscape as if mapping every turn. They passed a stretch of old cottonwoods stripped bare for the season. A line of fence posts leaned tired and half-rotted along the edge of a dry pasture. Silas tapped the reins lightly, eyes on the horizon. There's a widow out past the ridge, he said after a time. Keeps bees. Been needing help with her hives since her boy moved south. Marigold turned toward him. You think she'd hire me? She's near 80 and blind in one eye, he said. You show up willing, she'll count that as good enough. Virginia perked up behind them. Will we see the bees? Silas glanced back. You might. They crested a rise, and below them, in a hollow of pine and rock, sat a cabin with smoke curling from the chimney and wooden hives arranged like chess pieces across a frost-dusted field. Mrs. Dillard was smaller than Marigold expected, with a spine bent like a willow in wind and a voice sharp as thistle. She sniffed once, looked Marigold up and down, and nodded. You can sweep, you can lift, and you don't talk too loud, she said. That'll do. They stayed through midday. Marigold hauled wood and lifted hive lids under Mrs. Dillard's direction, while Silas sawed boards for a new chicken coop. Vernon helped gather kindling, and Virginia wandered the tree line, collecting handfuls of lichen and twigs she called fairy threads. When they returned to Silas's ranch, the sun hung low and amber. Marigold's skirts were smudged with wax and soil, but her steps were lighter. She'd earned a jar of honey and the promise of more work next week. Inside the house, while the children napped curled beneath the quilt, Marigold stood by the window. Silas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. She said, I have strong hands, Marigold murmured. That I don't flinch. He stepped closer. She saw right. Marigold didn't turn. I used to sew fine hems and wash china with gloves on. Now I smell like smoke and bees. I haven't worn anything silk in years. Silas moved beside her. You wore fear better than silk, if I had to guess. She looked at him then, her face unreadable. You guess right. He didn't speak, just waited, her voice dropped. There were years I didn't speak unless spoken to. He'd snap his fingers and I'd come running. I thought that was love. Silas's jaw ticked. And when you ran? I took nothing but a name that wasn't mine, she said. And 2 children I had no right to raise. She turned to face him fully. I still don't know if I saved them or stole them. They sleep easy, he said. That tells me enough. Marigold's breath caught. She searched his face like she didn't quite believe him. I don't know how to be in a place where someone sees me and doesn't want something. I don't want anything, he said simply. Except maybe to see you stay, she blinked. Stay, that colt in the back pastures wild as brushfire, needs a steady hand. The fence is leaning near the creek. The pantry's near bare. I can't do it all alone. And you think I can? I think you already are. They stood in silence, the fire crackling low behind them. Marigold glanced toward the bedroom where the children lay. They'd need schooling. The church in Basin Creek keeps a log of tutors come through. I can ride out and check. And clothes, shoes, Virginia's outgrown hers. There's a trader brings goods down from Helena twice a month. I'll talk to him. She folded her arms, unsure. You make it sound simple. Silas stepped back, gave her space. It's not, but nothing worth keeping ever is. Later that night, she sat on the porch long after the stars surfaced. Silas joined her, handing over a mug of warm cider. They didn't speak. The quiet stretched, not heavy but whole. When Virginia padded out, rubbing her eyes, Marigold opened her arms and the girl climbed into her lap. She dreamt about bees, she said softly. Said they danced. Silas looked out over the dark hills. She'll be all right. Marigold nodded, holding her close. And for the first time in years, she believed it. The snow came early that year, hushed and steady, blanketing the basin in a quiet that seemed to soften even the hardest edges. By the first week of November, the last of the high country trails were closed, and the world shrank to the valley between the ridges, where smoke curled from Silas's chimney and rabbit tracks stitched across the white. Inside, the stove crackled with cottonwood, and the air carried the scent of boiled oats and dried sage that Marigold had hung near the window to keep the damp away. She stood at the table, sleeves rolled, cutting the last of the salt pork into a stew pot, her hands moving without pause. Virginia sat on the rug, teaching Vernon how to shape a string into a cat's cradle, her voice a low thread of patience. Silas came in with snow on his coat and a pail of well water in his hand. He set it down and peeled off his gloves, fingers red from the cold. There's a storm coming, he said, shaking the ice from his hat. You'll want to pull the shutters tight tonight. Marigold glanced toward the window. How long? Could be days. Winds changing sharper than it should this time of year. He moved to the stove and crouched to add more wood. She watched the curve of his shoulders, the way his boots left wet prints on the plank floor. She had not realized how much space he filled until she no longer noticed it. I found a book, he said after a moment, at the church in Basin Creek. Primer's old, but the letters are still good. She turned fully toward him. You mean for Virginia? He nodded and pulled it from under his coat, a thin, cloth-bound volume with cracked corners. She took it from him gently. She'll learn fast, Marigold said. She listens close. Like someone else I know, he said, rising. She looked at him then, not with caution, but with something quieter. You always talk so plain, like a man who's never lied. I've lied plenty, he said. Just never saw the point in decorating it. She opened the book slowly, thumbing through its yellowed pages. I used to read by lamplight in a room with velvet drapes. Couldn't tell you now what any of those stories were about. Maybe they weren't worth remembering. I thought they meant something. Turns out they just passed the time. Silas stepped closer, the heat from the stove warming the space between them. And now, I don't want to pass the time anymore, she said. I want to build something that stays. His voice dropped. Then you're in the right place. Virginia looked up from the rug, her eyes tracking the movement between them. Mare, can we read it tonight? The story book. Marigold's fingers tightened on the spine. Yes, after supper. That evening, the wind picked up, rattling the eaves like bones in a sack. The shutters held, and inside, the fire glowed deep and golden. Marigold sat on the floor beside the children, the primer open on her knees. Vernon leaned against her arm, already dozing. Virginia traced the letters with her fingertip, her lips moving in silent mimicry. Silas sat in the rocker, one boot stretched toward the hearth, watching them without interruption. After the children were tucked in, Marigold stood at the doorway to their room, her hand still on the latch. I think I've been waiting for something, she said quietly, but I don't know what. He didn't move. Waiting's only worth it if you know what you're after. She turned toward the hearth, the firelight catching the side of her face. I've been so tired, Silas, even after sleep, even after food. It's like my bones remember more than I want them to. He rose and crossed to her. You don't have to explain it, not to me. She looked up at him. I keep thinking if I let myself want something again, I might lose everything, and I'm not sure I'd survive it this time. His voice was steady. You're not the same woman who ran. No, she said, I'm the one who stayed. Their eyes held. Neither moved, but something between them settled like snow on still water. I keep hearing your words, she whispered. You're worth every mile I rode. I didn't believe them. Not then. Do you now? She didn't answer right away. Then her hand lifted slowly, fingers brushing the edge of his coat near the collar. Yes, she said, but I don't know what to do with that. He reached up, touched her hand, held it there. You don't have to do anything. Just let it be true. The fire hissed as a log shifted. Outside, the storm began in earnest, but within the cabin there was only warmth and the closeness between them that no longer needed to be questioned. I'm not used to being wanted, she said. I don't want you because you're perfect, he said. I want you because you're here, and you stayed. She leaned into him then, her forehead resting against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her like he'd been waiting to do it for years. For the first time, she let herself rest. Not because the work was done, but because she knew, from this moment forward, she wouldn't be carrying it alone. By late December, the valley wore its silence like a second skin. Snow deepened, the wind pressed harder against the eaves, and days folded into evenings with little ceremony. The cabin had become a rhythm. Morning bread, midday chores, quiet twilight. Marigold stood in the barn one afternoon, brushing down the old mule as flakes drifted through the cracked loft boards. Her fingers moved steady along the animal's flank, rough from winter hair and age. Vernon sat on an overturned barrel nearby, humming tunelessly as he stacked kindling into a small pile, cheeks red from the cold. Silas stepped in, shaking snow from his shoulders. That trapline past the ridge hasn't been checked in 4 days. I'll ride out. Marigold glanced over her shoulder. You'll need to cross the creek. It iced over last night. I'll take the north bank, he said, reaching for a sack of oats. Less drift that way. She watched him a moment, then said low, There's a softness in the snow this time of year. Makes it easy to lose your footing. He paused, then looked directly at her. You worried I'll disappear? No, she said. Just that I'd notice too late if you did. He set the sack down and stepped close. I'd notice sooner. She nodded once and turned back to the mule, brushing slower now. That night, the storm broke. The snow stopped falling, and the air held that strange stillness that comes after something has passed but not yet settled. They sat by the hearth, the children asleep early after a long day helping Silas haul wood. Marigold's hands were wrapped around a mug of warmed cider, but she wasn't drinking. Silas leaned forward in the rocker, elbows on knees. You never told me where you were headed before the coach overturned. I didn't know, she said. I just knew it had to be somewhere he couldn't find me. You think he still might? She shook her head. Not anymore. Men like him don't chase what they meant to throw away. Silas looked at her, the fire catching in his eyes. You want to build something here? She didn't answer right away. Then she spoke softly. I want them to remember a place where they were safe, where they were seen. And you? He asked. I want to stop waiting for something to go wrong. He leaned back, the chair creaking faintly beneath him. I've been on my own since I was 17. Dug fence posts for a man outside Miles City. Slept in haylofts. Fixed my own teeth with a bottle of whiskey and a match. Marigold looked at him. You ever think about leaving this place? I did, he said. Until the night I found you in that dry creek bed. Silas stood and crossed to the window, where frost had crept inward like lace. I used to think quiet meant I was alone. Now it just means you're near. She set the mug down and stepped toward him. You keep saying things I don't know how to answer. You don't have to answer anything, Marigold. I'm not asking for promises. She reached out then, slowly, and touched his hand where it rested on the sill. Then what are you asking for? He turned to her, his voice low. Room to stay beside you. The firelight danced across her face, and for the first time her expression held no wariness, only stillness. I never wanted to belong to someone again, she said, but I think I might want to belong somewhere. He took her hand fully then, his fingers rough but warm. Then let this place be yours. She nodded once. Later, when she curled beneath the quilt with the children, she didn't lie awake waiting for the dark to shift. Outside, the land slept deep beneath the snow, and inside, the quiet no longer felt like absence. It felt like peace. The thaw came slow, with more fog than sunlight. Ice bled from the edges of the creek first, cracking like old bone in the early hours. By late March, the snow had crusted and buckled, revealing black earth beneath, and the chickens ventured farther from their coop, their feet pressing tiny stars into the softened ground. Virginia had taken to drawing pictures in the frost on the window panes at dawn, animals, mostly, with long legs and too many ears. Vernon followed her everywhere, dragging a carved wooden rabbit Silas had whittled him on a length of string. The house was never quiet now, not truly, and for the first time Marigold welcomed the noise. She stood behind the house one morning, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing a shirt against the washboard. The water bit at her knuckles, but the ache felt honest. Silas stepped out from the barn, brushing sawdust from his trousers. He paused beside her and handed over a cloth-wrapped biscuit. "You didn't eat." "I forgot," she admitted, taking it. "You always forget when you're fixing things." She glanced at him, brushing hair from her cheek with the back of her wrist. "It's hard to know what to do with stillness." He crouched beside the wash basin. "That reminds me, I cleared out the loft." She raised a brow. "What you want with the loft?" "I thought we could build a room up there, for the children." Marigold looked down at the biscuit in her hand, then back to him. "That's not a small thing, I know, but they're old enough to need their own space. And you're old enough to stop sleeping in a chair." She smiled faintly, the kind that didn't flinch. "You planning on giving me the bed?" "I was thinking we might share it." Her breath caught. She set the biscuit down on the edge of the basin, wiped her hands on her apron. "You sure?" "I've been sure since I watched you fix a broken harness with thread meant for mending socks." She stepped closer, eyes steady on his. "I never thought I'd marry again. I never thought I would at all." Her voice softened. "Then what do we call this?" He reached for her hand, rough palm closing over her damp fingers. "Whatever you want it to be." She didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, she leaned in and pressed her lips to his, slow and certain, like a woman who'd stopped running. They married on the first full day of spring. The preacher rode in from Basin Creek with a Bible wrapped in oilcloth and a voice that cracked when he sang the hymn. Virginia wore a garland of early sagebrush blooms, and Vernon dropped a tin cup during the vows, which made Marigold laugh harder than she'd meant to. They ate cornbread and dried cherries at the table afterward. Silas carved their initials into the porch rail while the children napped, and Marigold stood behind him, hands folded around a cup of rosehip tea she'd saved for the occasion. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find I only imagined this place," she said. "You didn't," he replied. "This is real. You're real," she whispered. He turned to her, brushing the edge of her jaw with his thumb. "And I'm yours." The days that followed settled into something deeper than routine. Silas taught Vernon how to drive nails straight, one careful tap at a time. Virginia gathered eggs before first light and read aloud each evening, her voice gaining steadiness with every page. Marigold kept bees for Mrs. Dillard through the summer and returned with honeycomb wrapped in cloth, her hands sun-browned and steady. She planted herbs along the south wall of the house, yarrow, mint, a bit of catnip for the half-wild mouser that had adopted them. They built the loft room together, Silas sawing and Marigold sanding, the children handing up nails and asking questions too fast to answer. Late one August evening, when the sky was the color of worn denim and the last of the swallows dipped low over the pasture, Silas took Marigold's hand as they walked the fence line. "You ever miss it?" he asked. "What came before?" "No," she said. "Not even a little." They stopped near the gate, the one he'd repaired that spring. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. His arm came around her waist, and they stood there until the stars blinked on. "I never knew love could feel like this," she said. "Like what?" "Like quiet." And he understood exactly what she meant. The years carried on, as years do. The children grew tall and sure. Vernon built a rabbit hutch with his own hands by the time he was 12. Virginia stitched her first dress and wore it to church with pride. They never asked about the man who'd left them. They never had to. Marigold tended her bees and her garden, her hands always busy, her heart never empty. Silas expanded the barn, took in 2 colts and a milk cow that liked to knock over pails. They argued sometimes about fence posts and burned bread, but it never lasted long. At night, in the warmth of their bed, with the wind brushing the walls and the fire low in the hearth, Marigold would reach for his hand beneath the quilt, and he would always be there. And she never dreamed of running again.